faculty session of the Executive Program in Strategy Digital Marketing by Cambridge Edge Business School, Executive Education and Upgrad. Hope you're excited as we are, and I can see a lot of people already joining in, so that's a great sign. So, as you must be knowing, the session is on the topic customer focus, customer behavior, and the digital landscape, which, as per the core structure, is your module 1. We already have Professor Ahmed joining us. Welcome, Professor. He'll be taking you through the entire presentation on this topic, and later, if we have time, he'll be addressing the live questions and the questions sent by you. So, Professor, without taking more time, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay.
Over to you, Professor.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Tanshu. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm very excited to be running the first of these 2 sessions. Welcome, everyone. I'm really happy. It's a joy to be participating in this session with you. I would normally say good afternoon, but we know we have a global audience, so it could be night for you. In that case, good night. Or if you're further west from where I am, then it could be morning for you as well. It's that time of the year when school restarts and people go back to school, and so this is perfect timing. In fact, this morning, as I was walking to my office, I noticed it was one of these dreary, wet, gray English days. But for the first time, I noticed there was a chill in the air. And I usually walk past a meadow, and there are some cows, and I noticed even the cows were huddled under the trees seeking some shelter. Of course, there'll always be some hardy souls. There were those few cows that, completely oblivious to the wind and the chill. They were just in the middle of the meadow, just gorging away on the grass. And why not? It's the end of summer for them as well, and soon the farmer will come and corral them into the truck and take them into the barn for the rest of the winter. So why not get their last feast in, irrespective of what the weather conditions are like? Well, the same for us. Irrespective of what the weather conditions are like, we've got work to do. And so what I've got planned for you today is a presentation. And this is normally a presentation that I do in class. So it's based on that. I've modified it to some extent so that we can fit it into this format. So I've got a presentation, and my colleagues from Upgrad also forwarded me questions. So it's, I'm really pleased to see that you're so engaged with the course content. And my colleagues from Upgrad forwarded me some questions. I don't think they sent me all the questions. They selected a subset, and I have those questions, and I'll try and address them as we go through the presentation. And then depending on how much time we have at the end, we might be able to take a couple of, maybe 1 or 2 live questions. So we'll see how that goes. So I don't want to promise anything because some of these sessions I've run in the past have taken longer than what we thought it would. So we'll see how it goes. But anyway, welcome, and I hope you enjoy the session. I'm looking forward to the session, and so let's get started without much ado. So what I'll do, Hitanshu, is I'm going to try and share my slides. And let me know if the slides are not visible, because once or twice in the past we've had some glitches. So I'm going to share my screen and share the slides. Okay, so let me know if it doesn't. And same way, Hitanshu, any stage, if there's any problem and you're not able to see me or hear me, or the slides are not working, just send me a text, right? So just let me know, alert me, okay? Okay, so my slides should now be visible, and if they are not, Hitanshu, just actually instead of sending me a text, I realize I cannot see the text box on Google Hangouts. Just send me an email. Yeah. I've got my other laptop open, and I can monitor email on that. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So so what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about customer centricity, and as part of customer centricity, I'm going to talk about 3 things. I'm going to talk about the notion of a value proposition. I'm going to talk about customer focus, and I'm going to talk about customer journey. And it's really, when we think about these 3 things, these are the building blocks of how we become or remain customer centric in all our marketing activities, in whatever we do. So let me begin with a quote from Peter Drucker. And the quote is, that the purpose of business is to create a customer. Now, I wouldn't expect you to be surprised by this quote. In fact, you might be surprised by it. It seems so obvious. You know, why is he even saying that? So Peter Drucker was one of these big management gurus. He was a big person in management education. So why does he make a statement like this? And why do I, as a professor at Cambridge, you know, take the trouble to show you this kind of a quote? In fact, on the very first slide. And so let's step back for a minute and just think about this. So just indulge me. And what I want to do for you is graphically just lay out what a business tries to do. So there's typically a firm or a business, and it has customers. And what the firm is trying to do is to create, communicate, and deliver value to its customers. In return, what the firm hopes is that it will be able to extract or capture some value back from the customer. And that's how it will sustain itself. These are the revenues. And of course, there might be costs as well in creating, communicating, and delivering the value. And so we would take the difference between the revenues and the costs, and those would be the net profits for the firm. But this is essentially what a firm is trying to do. And if we begin to think about it this way, what we want to really do if we want to be a long-term firm, you know, instead of trying to be a fly-by-night, a short-run operator, if we really want to take a long view on this, then the value that we want to create as the firm for our customers should be more than what we extract back from them. You know, there should be some value to the customer. Otherwise, the customer will not remain our customer. The customer will not be loyal to us. The customer will not stick with us and, in fact, jump ship and, you know, start transacting or purchasing from our competitors, right? So really, taking the long view, we want the value created to be more than what we extract back from the customer. In fact, there's a broader discussion to be had, which we will not have today in the interest of time, is that this also leads to a discussion about the social purpose of a business. So if the value that the firm is creating is more than what it's extracting back from its customers or society, then, you know, that's the social value that the business provides to society as a whole. But that's not a discussion for today. So the question really comes down to is this value that the firm creates, who determines this value? Now, where does this value come from? And if you stop and think about it for a minute, the answer is obvious. It's the customer. It's the customer that really determines the value that the firm creates. So it's not what the firm thinks the value is. It really is what the customer thinks the value of that product or service it is for her. And this is a really important thing because this helps us understand what we mean. What do we really mean when we talk about a value proposition? Who creates the value in a value proposition? The value in the value proposition comes from the customer. And this is the first step in becoming customer-centric. Oftentimes, we are not customer-centric because we are trying to impute the value in that value proposition and not really thinking about what the customer might perceive that value to be. So another thing to be absolutely clear on is what is the definition of a value proposition. So let me begin also by defining what I mean by a value proposition. A value proposition is one of two things. A superior value proposition is either where a firm provides a similar benefit as its competitors, but at a lower cost to its customers. So the company's strength comes from providing the same benefit as what the competitors provide, but at a lower cost. Or, and this is the second way a value proposition may be superior to its competitors, the value proposition provides a superior benefit to its customers at the same cost as its competitors. These are the only two ways that you can have a feasible value proposition. Oftentimes, I'll have students who walk into my door, come into my office and say, Professor, I have a value proposition and I'm interested in thinking of creating a business around this, you know, and I want to get some advice from you, some suggestions from you of how I should go about trying to launch this business, you know, the startup. And I will ask them, okay, what's your value proposition? And we'll dig through this. And I have to say, disappointingly, that more often than not, it will not be clear which of these two criteria the value proposition meets. So, so this is a really important thing, that that do we have a value proposition or not? And that is dependent solely on one of these two criteria being met. And so let me give you some examples. Let me give you some examples to clarify what I mean by this. So think about Google. So about, well, I would say it's going on to almost 20 years now since Google was founded. But before Google existed, and you know, I regret I'm going to be actually letting revealing how old I am when I talk about this, because 20 years ago when Google was first founded, I was a graduate student. And before Google, there were all these search engines like Alta Vista, there was Lycos, there was AOL, FreeServe, Yahoo was a big search engine at that stage, and they were trying to grow that business. And one of the things, well, of course, search engines were great compared to what had come before them, which was nothing. But the moment you used one of these search engines, you noticed two things. One, these were really slow. And two, the search responses were highly irrelevant. So you had to dig through pages and pages and pages before you found something relevant. And then I remember one day, a friend of mine, Tim Cheney, in fact, I remember his name. I remember the moment when it happened. I was complaining to him about, you know, how excruciatingly long it takes to do these searches. He says, why don't you try Google? I'd never heard of Google. I tried Google. And remarkably, the two things I noticed was, one, that was really fast. It was extremely fast. And two, the responses were extremely relevant. You know, right on top, I found the answer to the question I'd asked. And so what Google was able to do was, and this is their business proposition even today, this is their main business model. This is what drives their business today, in spite of the fact that they have so many other businesses like Google X. You know, so of course now it's not Google anymore. Alphabet is the overarching holding company. But Alphabet or Google, their value proposition is search, right? They want to be really good at search. And they provide, so they're actually able to meet both these conditions. They provide superior benefits, that their responses are really relevant and right on top. And the cost is lower. And in this case, the cost is the time cost of doing the search, right? How long you have to wait before the response comes back. And they beat their competitors on both these criteria, right? So that's an amazing value proposition, and that's the value proposition they have sustained till today. Every day they work on this. So my colleague Sasha Liu, Professor Sasha Liu, is going to run a couple of sessions with you, and she'll talk about this, and she'll actually go through this when she talks about search engine optimization. How Google, on average, once or twice a day changes its algorithm, because every day they are working on improving their value proposition, because they're worried about threats. They're worried about competitive threats. They don't want to lose that edge. So they're constantly, 20 years now, constantly, almost every day, they update their algorithm. And in fact, that makes things harder for marketers, right? Because now we don't know how to actually get our links and our brands and our products and services to appear high on that Google search, right? So we have to do search engine optimization. We have to kind of guess what Google is trying to do and in response to SEO. And my colleague, Professor Liu, is going to talk more about this. But that's their value proposition, right? That they meet both these criteria. Another example is Priceline, right? So Priceline, you name your own price. What is their value proposition? Their value proposition is they provide the same benefit as their competitors, but at a much lower cost, right? Because you can name your own price. So you can get the same airline ticket or the same hotel room or whatever it is, whatever service you're looking for. You can get the same service as you would get directly from the vendor, directly from the airline or the hotel, or from a competitor. But you can name your own price, and the price you can name can be lower than what the competitor would be charging you. It's just that if Priceline.com is not able to get that service at that price, you know, you just won't get that service. But if you do get it, then you'll pay a lower price that you have named yourself. So their value proposition is that they provide the same benefits as their competitors, but at a much lower cost. And in this case, the cost is actually a monetary cost, right? It's the price that you would pay. So these are some examples of what makes a value proposition superior. And so you have to be really clear about this. Do you have a value proposition or do you not? And you will only have a value proposition if it meets one of these two criteria. And if it doesn't, then you don't have one. And if it meets both, like Google, then that's great. That's even all the more better. And the second thing to take away is who determines the value in the value proposition? It's the customer. The customer decides what is the value you're providing to them. So think about your own selves. You know, we often think about, hey, that's a great deal. That's value for money. And it's value to us. We decide whether it's value to us or not. And it's the same way. So put your customer hat on every once in a while and think about, you know, what is value, right? And it's the customer who determines what value is. Okay. So this is the first aspect of thinking about customer centricity. So when we want to be a customer centric firm or we want to be a customer centric marketer, we have to be aware of this really important aspect. The second thing is customer focus. So let me give you another quote from Peter Drucker here. So Peter Drucker says, the aim of marketing is to make selling superfluous. Marketing is to know and understand the customer so well that the product or service fits him or her and sells itself. So let's again stop for a minute and think about what is Professor Drucker trying to say. And this kind of seems, again, really obvious. So why would he say this? And why, as me as the professor at an institution like CJBS, have this on a slide? So let's just stop for a minute and think about what does he mean by this. So actually, to answer this question, let me show you a video and then come back to this. Okay, so let me show you a video. So this is a Steve Jobs video. And and let me remind you that Steve Jobs was fired twice from Apple before he actually came back to build Apple into the great icon, the brand icon that it is today. So this is at that time one of those, you know, that difficult phase when he had been fired and he'd come back. And he's doing a town hall meeting with investors in Apple, you know, fans of Apple products. And he's just been asked an extremely rude question. You know, it's actually, you know, I wouldn't say it's a rude question. I think it's a fairly relevant question. The question is about what are the kind of products that Apple is developing and what their strategy is going forward. The only problem is that the person who's asked him this question has asked it in a very rude way. And so this is Steve Jobs' response. So let me show you this video, and then we'll come back to what I was talking about, Peter Drucker's code. Because I think the Peter Drucker's code is going to make more sense after we've seen this video. Okay, so let me start this video from somewhere here. Sorry, just give me a second. I think this video may not be embedded correctly, so I'm actually just going to pull the video. Just give me a second. Sorry, this is just buffering. It's just slow. Just give me a second. Hello, Hitanshu?
Yeah, Professor. Yeah, Professor.
You can see and hear me, right?
Yeah, I can see you, but the presentation is gone.
Yeah, I just shut it because I think that video is buffering. Just give me a minute. I'm just going to get it. So that's why. Just give me a second. That just slowed down and was buffering too long. So I just thought I'd restart it. So just give me a second. Just hang on. Just bear with me, folks. We'll just get this back.
Yes.
Okay, so this version is working, and so let me just come back and share my screen again, and then I think we'll be good to go. Okay, it was just having a harder time finding that video. Okay, here we go. It was just working. Let me try this again. Just give me a second. Okay. I think there might be an internal network issue. So let me do another thing. I'm just going to copy and put this on my desktop, and we'll just play it from there. Okay. Okay, so let's see my slides.
Yes.
Okay, there we go.
You're right. You can please some of the people some of the time, but one of the hardest things when you're trying to affect change is that people like this gentleman are right in some areas. I'm sure that there are some things OpenDoc does, probably even more that I'm not familiar with, that nothing else out there does. And I'm sure that you can make some demos, maybe a small commercial app that demonstrates those things. The hardest thing is, how does that fit in to a cohesive, larger vision that's going to allow you to sell $8 billion, $10 billion of product a year? And one of the things I've always found is that you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it. And I've made this mistake probably more than anybody else in this room. And I've got the scar tissue to prove it. And I know that it's the case. And as we have tried to come up with a strategy and a vision for Apple, it started with what incredible benefits can we give to the customer? Where can we take the customer? Not starting with, let's sit down with the engineers and figure out what awesome technology we have, and then how are we going to market that? And I think that's the right path to take. I remember with the laser writer, we built the world's first small laser printers, you know, and there was awesome technology in that box. We had the first Canon laser printing, cheap laser printing engine in the world, in the United States here at Apple. We had a very wonderful printer controller that we designed. We had Adobe's PostScript software in there. We had AppleTalk in there. Just awesome technology in the box. And I remember seeing the first printout come out of it, and just picking it up and looking at it and thinking, you know, we can sell this. Because you don't have to know anything about what's in that box. All we have to do is hold this up and go, do you want this? And if you can remember back in 1984, before laser printers, it was pretty startling to see that. People went, wow, yes. Yeah.
So now to come back to this Peter Drucker quote, having seen this Steve Jobs video. So let's recap. What is Steve Jobs saying? And by the way, again, I regret that we had that slight glitch. I think there's just some internal network problem. And so the video was buffering too long when I was trying to play it off our server. So I just had to copy it on my desktop. What does Peter Drucker mean by this? And in fact, this goes to one of the questions that I was asked, one of the questions that one of you raised. And that question is that what is the role of outbound marketing? At what stage of the marketing funnel does it fit in? So that's the question. So outbound marketing versus inbound marketing. So I know, HubSpot, companies like HubSpot talk a lot about inbound marketing, and they make this big distinction between outbound marketing, which they call, the traditional old way of doing things, and inbound marketing, which is the new way of doing things. But what Peter Drucker is saying is there really is no distinction. And the distinction is between doing marketing badly and doing marketing well. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's what Steve Jobs says. So Steve Jobs says that he's got the scar tissue to prove that you don't want to do things where you sit down with the engineers first, figure out what awesome technology you have, and then how are you going to sell it? He says what you have to do is you have to start with the customer and then think back, how is it that you can create something that will provide value to the customer? And he ends with this example. He ends with the example of the laser writer, right? That the first laser printers that they really developed in the US. And he says that there was great technology in that box, but it was not about the technology itself. It was about the fact that what came out of that box, that laser printer, when you printed with the laser printer, that was so startling, that was so remarkably superior to what you could print with existing technology, which was primarily dot matrix printers, that you don't have to go and explain to the customer, this is why this is really good for you, and this is why this technology is superior, and this is why you should buy it. All you had to do was to show the customer those two products, the printout from the laser printer and the printout from the dot matrix printer. And the laser printer would sell itself. Of course, there were all these issues about, how would you price it, and your channels and distribution and all that kind of stuff, and that is important. But at the end of the day, the customer has to find value. And of course, not all customers would buy it. Not all customers would find value. And we're coming to that. In fact, that's another one of these questions here. This heterogeneity in segments. There are people with different values. Right? Some people value that product and some people don't. We're coming to that. But for the people who do find value, the product sells itself. Right? And that is what Peter Drucker is saying, that you have to really know and understand the customer so well that what you create, they will find value in it. They will buy into the value proposition. And the product will sell itself. Right? So you don't have to go out and do what what people like HubSpot call outbound marketing and force stuff down people's throats. And I think marketing has always realized this. It's just, I think it's a false dichotomy that's being created, outbound versus inbound marketing. That inbound is where, you organically draw people in, and outbound is, where you're forcing stuff down. Well, that's bad marketing. I wouldn't even call it outbound marketing. I would say that's just bad marketing. That's not marketing. That's not an understanding of marketing, because marketing begins by understanding the customer. It begins by really realizing, do you have a value proposition or not? If you don't have a value proposition, then sure, then if you're going to be under constraints because whatever financial purposes, investor purposes, operational purposes, of course, then you're going to resort to doing, bad marketing, which is trying to force stuff down people's throats. So if you go and talk to the average person on the street, and that's why marketing often gets a bad rap. You go and talk to the person on the street, they will say, and ask them what is marketing. Unfortunately, a lot of times people will say things like marketing is advertising, it's sales, it's manipulation, and really it doesn't need to be that. If we understand our customers well and we create products that they value, as Peter Drucker says, then the product will have a much easier time selling itself. And so the bottom line here is think outside in, not inside out. So don't start with your engineers and your technology and try and figure out how are you going to sell this. Start with the customers, try and figure out what they want, and then see how you can deliver that based on the technology or the capabilities you have. Another way to say this is make what you can sell, don't sell what you can make. The easy trap to fall into is, we can make this, we can do this well, so let's try and figure out a way to sell this. And that's always going to create problems in the long run. It's much better up front to know what you can sell based on, what customers want, and then work towards making that. So if you think about the greatest innovations, the greatest product adoptions, the greatest launches, those are typically products where there is a real value proposition. It's a product that actually meets some kind of a customer need. And so that's the next thing that we're going to go and think about is how do we assess these customer needs? How do we really think about creating these value propositions? Where do we get the insights to do this? And so this is the second aspect of being customer-centric, is be aware that the value and the value proposition comes from the customer. Second, have that customer focus. Think about what is it that customers want, and then come back to the ideation room or to the ideation center where you think about things in a creative way, and you think about what is it that we can create. Okay. So at this stage, it may also help to just stop for a minute and think about if customer focus is so obvious. Again, if you were to go and talk to any company and ask them, are you customer focused or are you customer centric? I doubt if there is even a single company, even the most customer unfocused of companies, or the most customer uncentric of companies, I don't think even they will admit that they don't have customer focus or customer centricity. It's one of those things. Everyone likes to believe they're customer focused or customer centric. It's just like, it's again human nature. There are some things we just like to believe about ourselves. We inherently accept that these are good things, and we just find it very difficult to say that, how could we not be this? And so why is it? Again, it might be helpful for a minute to think about. Why is it that companies either don't have customer focus or they lose customer focus? So let's look at some examples of this. So one example of this is Palm. Again, this is about 20-25 years ago. Just like Apple or Samsung are big, huge brands in the smartphone arena. About 20-25 years ago, Palm was the big brand. It was the big player in the PDA, the portable digital assistant category. And that was the it product to have. That was the cool product to have. Everyone sort of walked around with the Palm. And what was a Palm? Palm was essentially a digital calendar. It was a digital diary. That's what it was, right? So before that, people used to sort of take notes and keep calendars with pen and paper, essentially in a diary. And they created the first digital diary, so you could do it in a digital way. You could carry this in your little pocket. And Palm for a while was a blockbuster product, but where they missed the boat was that they didn't see the convergence between telephony and PDAs coming. And this is where BlackBerry went, right? So BlackBerry was the first successful smartphone company. And Palm just got so completely obsessed with their own product, which was actually doing really well. It was a cash cow. It was a blockbuster product, that they just did not pay attention to what the customer needs were. So they just thought they satisfied all their customer needs. What they'd done was they satisfied customer needs compared to existing or older technology, but they hadn't satisfied all the customer needs, which were also, the customers also, if you gave them the option, they also prefer to have a digital diary that was also a telephone. And of course, since then we've discovered customers want not just digital diary and a phone, but they also want to be able a little computer in their pocket. They also want a camera in their pocket. They also want lots of other things that you can do now by adding the little add-ons onto your smartphones, right? Like even creating like a telescope and all that kind of stuff. So essentially, Palm got self-obsessed, they got inward focused, and they missed what the customer needs were and what the customers really wanted. And that was the reason for their lack of customer focus. Another example why sometimes firms lose customer focus is they focus on competitors very narrowly. So if you think about Kodak, and you think about what is the business Kodak is in. So what is the customer need that Kodak meets or used to meet when they existed? It was really about creating memories, right? So what Kodak used to help customers do was to create memories, capture the important moments in their life. And so if you were to ask Kodak, who are your competitors? Kodak probably would have said, other camera and film manufacturing firms like Fuji or Nikon or Canon. And where they missed the boat was that the world was changing, that people don't buy cameras anymore. And that's a process that's been going on for the last 20 years, that slowly the ground has been shifting. This industry has been changing, that people stopped buying films, they went to digital photography, and then they even stopped buying cameras because phones became good enough. So their competitors were not just these other film and camera manufacturing companies. Their competitors were even smartphone manufacturing companies. Their competitors were any websites that help you share photographs and videos and any kind of audio-visual media that customers created. So again, that was the reason for the lack of customer focus. That sometimes we just focus too much on our products and forget the customers. Other times we focus too much on our products or our industry and forget about what else is happening in the world that affects our customers and our industry. Another example of this is just changing trends. So Nestle had this problem. Nestle manufactures and sells candy bars. And with the changing consumer trends and consumer perceptions about things like consumption of healthy foods, more nutritious foods, Nestle found that its sales of candy bars was dropping. So in this instance, there is a good outcome for Nestle, that they did some market research, they did focus groups, and they got some insights by understanding the customer journey. And I'm going to come and talk about the customer journey after this. By understanding the customer journey. And when they understood the customer journey, they realized that what was happening was that consumers, because of their changing attitudes towards food, especially the focus on eating healthy and nutritious foods, they didn't want to open a large candy bar. But they would be perfectly happy opening a small candy bar, a bite-sized candy bar. So Nestle essentially changed its product packaging, right? They changed the product and the product packaging, and they went from producing these large candy bars to these bite-sized candy bars. And as you know, human nature is that once you open one of these bite-sized candy bars, you eat it. And if you like it, then you open a second one, and then you open a third one and a fourth one, and so on, right? So before you know it, you've actually eaten more than you would have eaten if you were eating just one big candy bar. So actually worked in Nestle's favor. But again, this is an example where they were able to retain their customer focus by really thinking about what was happening with the customer journey. Another reason why firms lose customer focus is, again, just simple human nature, that it's very often managers use their own internal intuition to drive their decision making, or they make their decisions based on the small sample of people they know. So this is how I do things, or this is how I know this person who does things this way. And then we use that to extrapolate to our customers or to the wider population. And very often that is just wrong. That's just wrong. Our intuitions are very often incorrect. It's very easy to fool ourselves and for ourselves to be fooled in many, many different ways. And so that's why we have to go out and we actually have to do actual market research and use evidence-based decision making. So we actually have to do market research, and whether we have an internal market research department or we go and hire someone from a market research organization, but we have to do market research and really understand what is it that our customers are looking for, what is it that hurts them, what are their needs, and then how can we fix it based on our capabilities. And so markets are routinely evolving, but managers and firms find it hard to adapt. And that's the reason why firms often lose customer focus. And the irony is they don't even realize they've lost customer focus often until it's too late. So periodically, the best practice is to periodically, so depending on the industry you're in, if it's a really fast changing industry, then you do this often. But if it's a really slow changing industry, it's a more mature industry, then maybe less frequently. You have to assess how customer focused are we, how customer centric are we, how much are we paying attention to our customers, who are our customers, have they changed, have their attitudes changed, have their needs changed, and so we have to do this. Okay, and this is an example of a study. So just to give you an example of a study where in this study they went out and this was done at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. They interviewed MBA students there and they asked them a series of questions and they said, what do you think, what proportion of US men and US women do these things or believe in these things? And it was a series of 11 questions. And then they went out and they surveyed the population and actually figured out what the actual number was, what proportion of the US population, men and women, actually did these things or believed in these things. And they found that the intuition of the MBAs, their predictions about what proportion of the US population believed or did these things, that correlation was about 10%. It was 0.92. So about 10% of what the MBAs thought that the rest of the world did actually did that. If you talk to an average consumer, they also did the same exercise with average consumers, asked average consumers, what do you think the average person in the US believes or does, on these 11 questions. That person's intuition about this correlated about 20% with actual fact. And research managers whose professional job it is to know this stuff, their intuition, their beliefs about this compared to what was actually happening in the world, that correlation was 23%. So just an example that very often our intuitions are just plain wrong, or they don't correlate well with what is actually happening with the population of interest to us. So we actually have to go out and measure these things to stay customer focused and customer centric. Okay, so I've been talking about the customer journey. Let me now talk more about that because one building block is thinking about the value proposition. Another building block is thinking about customer focus. But where do the insights really come from? They come from the customer journey. And so the customer journey can help us do various things. And I'm just going to give you some examples of the kinds of questions and the kinds of important issues it can help us address. It can help us address, if we really understand the customer journey framework, it can help us identify opportunities for value creation. It can help us diagnose weaknesses in the value proposition. So what might be the pain points for customers in our delivery of our product or service, or their purchase or of our product or service, or their engagement with our company. The customer journey framework can also help us ensure that that our customers remain brand loyal, or it can help us create interest for different kinds of products. Okay. And so let me now go through this framework and some examples to illustrate what I'm trying to say. Okay. So let's think about, so this is an exercise I would do in class. Unfortunately, this is not a face-to-face setting. Otherwise, we would do it in a face-to-face setting. So let me try and replicate this best I can in this digital setting. And so what I would want you to think about is, I want you to put yourself in one of these categories. All right, so you could either be buying product A, which is a mundane product. It costs less than £5. Or you could think of yourself as buying product B, which is a utilitarian product. So it's really a functional product, and it costs more than £100. So it's an expensive product, but it's primarily functional. So an example of product A might be a cup of coffee, right? So it's a mundane product that costs less than £5. Product B, something that's utilitarian but costs more than £100, could be some sort of a gadget that you use for a house purpose, right? So it could be something like a fridge, it could be a vacuum cleaner, could be a TV, something like that, some functional product for the house. Product C, you could be thinking of buying product C, which is a hedonic product, but that is also expensive. It costs more than £100. So it could be like an expensive dress or an expensive suit or something like that, or an expensive pair of shoes. But it's really for hedonic purposes. You're just buying it because it helps you express something about yourself, So if we have these three kinds of products, typically with product A, what you would do is that you would have a pretty good idea where to get this product. So if you buy coffee every day, then you have a pretty good idea. There's a certain time of the day when you feel you need a cup of coffee. It could be in the morning, early in the morning. It could be in the middle of the morning. It could be in the afternoon when you think you need some coffee. And you know your favorite place where you get your coffee. You might even know your favorite barista. You might know your favorite kind of coffee. So you like it exactly that way. With this kind of a flavor, whether you like cream with it or you like sugar with it. If it's cream, then you want like, what is it? Low skim milk? Is it whole milk? Or maybe you don't want milk. Maybe you want like it black. Do you want sugar? Do you want sweetener? All that kind of stuff. Or do you want some, caramel with it? Do you want vanilla flavoring? All that kind of stuff. So you could have a very specific taste for coffee, and you go to that specific store, and you get it from that specific barista, specific time of the day. So that could be how you buy that cup of coffee. Or it could be, you really care about your coffee, but you're new in town, and you're trying to figure out where would you get. So the previous town you lived in, you had your favorite place and you knew exactly what you wanted, but now in this new town, you don't know where to get that coffee. So what you would do is, in that case, you would search a little bit, right? So either you'd ask your colleagues, or you'd search online, try and get some reviews for different kinds of cafes, or you just go out and try. Maybe you try different places, or you try and find something that's really convenient, really close to where you are, right? So in the first instance, the very first time you're trying to figure out what kind of coffee you want or where you want to get the coffee because you're new in town, you go through this elaborate process where you search, and then you identify, you compare alternatives, and then you pick the coffee that you want. And if it turns out it's a great hit with you, but if it's a miss, then you just try again, right? But if it's a great hit with you, then you go into this automatic routine, just like you did in your old town, right? That, come that certain time of the day when you think you need some caffeine or you need coffee, you go exactly to the place and you get exactly what you want, right? So the customer journey for this kind of a person who really takes that coffee seriously switches. The first time they're trying to do this, it's a very elaborate process. And then once they figure out exactly what they want, even though they care a lot about their cup of coffee, it becomes pretty automated. Now you could be another kind of person who, who likes coffee, but, it's okay. Maybe it's just all about, you are the kind of person that says one cup of coffee is as good as another cup of coffee. And what really matters to you is just the price or the convenience where you can get it. And so, you don't have that high an involvement with your coffee. It's not such a big deal for you. You like your coffee and you want it, but you're going to just get it from the cheapest place or the most convenient place, right? In that case, when you think you need coffee, you just go to the place where you can get it easily and you consume it without thinking too much about it. So what in thinking about how people approach their coffee, and these are two examples I took, we see there's one category of person who's highly involved with their coffee. So even though it costs less than £5, this is a serious thing for them. They take their coffee seriously, and they have a certain kind of customer journey. In fact, the very first time they're very involved with coffee, but the first time they're trying to buy coffee, they go through this elaborate process. But once they figure out what really works for them, they sort of short circuit this customer journey, and they do things in a sort of automated way. Then there's this other person who has a low involvement with coffee, and they're just looking for coffee that's cheap or convenient when they need it. And they also actually tend to do things like what the highly involved person would do, but after the highly involved person has figured out exactly what they want. And then there could be a third kind of person who doesn't even care about coffee, who doesn't even want coffee, right? And so their customer journey is non-existent as far as coffee is concerned. So if you're a coffee manufacturer, those people are just not in your customer segment. So we can now see this, if you think about it this way, we can begin to see there might be different segments, right? So even if it's a mundane product that a firm is selling that costs less than £5, there can be different segments of customers who care about that product differently and have very different customer journeys in engaging with that product. And that customer journey can in fact depend on the context, right? If you think about product B, so this, maybe say it's an expensive vacuum cleaner you're buying. Now, it's not very often that we buy expensive vacuum cleaners. So most of us, the way we would approach this, even though this is utilitarian, the way most of us would approach this is we say, let's actually think about, we don't buy expensive vacuum cleaners often. So what is available on the market? So first we think about, do we need this? So maybe our old vacuum cleaner is not working well. Maybe it's broken. Maybe we've just had new carpeting installed, which requires a much better, maybe it's a deeper carpet or it's a more expensive carpet, and so we need a better vacuum cleaner for it. So there's some need that leads us to think about thinking about buying this new vacuum cleaner. And then we'll go out and we'll probably do some search because we don't even know what exists. For most of us, vacuum cleaners are not things we're thinking about on a daily basis, and we don't know what's available on the market. So we'll do some search. We'll sort of talk to friends, colleagues, again, probably search online, maybe look at consumer reports, that kind of stuff. We compare these alternatives. We form a consideration set. We compare these alternatives. And then we buy the thing. We compare prices, we compare all kinds of aspects, features, warranties, all kinds of aspects of the product. And then we buy it, and then there's a post-purchase aspect to it, right? So that, if it works well for us, then we are happy. We might even post a comment on the website saying this is a great product. We might become ambassadors for the product. If it doesn't work, then we'll try and figure out a way to return it and, get our money back or something. So that's how typically a customer journey would work for these utilitarian products that are typically expensive. Now think about these hedonic products. You're walking past, you're on the high street, you're walking past a showroom and you see a really nice pair of shoes in the store window. And you say, you promise yourself, I'm going to buy that for myself, when I have some money, or, I want to treat myself. Or you say, that's a really gorgeous jacket, or that's a really gorgeous dress. I'm going to buy it for my spouse or my partner, or, my boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever it is. Or that's a, really nice set of clothes. I'm going to buy it for my kids, whatever, or my parents or whatever it is. Right? So that's a very different customer journey, right? You almost first identify, because this is done more emotionally, right? This is self-expression. You're either expressing to yourself or you're expressing to someone else, and that's why you're buying the product. It's a very different motivation. And so in this case, you find a way to justify buying this product. And so what we begin to see is that there are different kinds of customer journeys depending on the kind of product and depending on the context. And in fact, also depending on the kind of person and their involvement with that product or that product category, right? So for these high involvement utilitarian products, these typically, and in this case, high involvement can correlate well with expensive products. So if you're buying, these less frequently purchased functional products that are expensive. Now I gave you the example of a vacuum cleaner. Another example could be buying something like a car, right? That we don't buy these things frequently. So we actually go through this elaborate process of buying this product. But there's an aspect of need recognition, there's an aspect of information search, there's an aspect of evaluation of alternatives. Then we make the choice, and then there's the post-purchase aspect, right? But again, this gets complicated because I just gave you the example of a car. Not all people think of cars as purely functional. There's a large segment of people who think of cars as purely functional. Cars are just a way of getting from point A to point B. But for a lot of people, cars are a way of expressing themselves, right? So they buy cars because they think, they really are into cars. They think that that's a cool car and that's not a cool car, or that car really works well, that doesn't work well, that's a brand I like, so all kinds of things, right? So again, you begin to see there are these segments, and depending on what segment you're in and how you engage with that product category, your customer journey will be very different, right? So I gave you the example of coffee, right? That's a mundane product, costs less than £5. And if you are the kind of person who, really just goes by convenience or price, coffee, you like coffee, but you don't like it so much that you're going to invest time figuring out what is really great coffee and where to get it, then if you're just going to go by convenience and price, you pretty much short circuit a lot of these steps. So this is typically what happens if the engagement with that product is low. So and often low engagement is really tied up with inexpensive kinds of mundane products. Not always, because I just give you the example of someone who's really a coffee aficionado, a gourmet, who really cares about coffee. In that case, their search process for coffee would be more like this, like a high-end Walmart utilitarian product. So again, it depends. What really happens is the customer journey is determined by the engagement of the person with the product or the product category, and by the context, right? So this customer journey that I'm showing you, this could be the customer journey for a person who's highly engaged with coffee, but now they've figured out exactly where they want their favorite cup of coffee or where they get their favorite cup of coffee. So they don't have to go through this elaborate process each time they're buying a cup of coffee. They figured out exactly the cafe and the barista and the coffee that they want, and then they automatically just go to that place, even though the first time they actually went through the elaborate process, and even though they really care about that coffee. But their customer journey begins to look like the customer journey of a person who doesn't really care much about coffee and just goes by convenience or price. So it becomes complicated, right? And so this is a question that was asked, that do different stages of the marketing funnel for a brand campaign differ from person to person? If so, how do we address that? Right, this is exactly what this is, that there is this heterogeneity. There's this heterogeneity in segments. There's this difference in segments, how people respond, how much value they place on a product or a service. So in fact, the value proposition, when I began with the question that, the value in the value proposition comes from the customers. Well, which customer? Because there are different kinds of customers. Some customers might actually put a high value on that value proposition. Other customers don't care about it. So if you open up a brand new coffee shop where you're selling fair trade coffee, well, there's a lot of value in that to the customer who really cares about coffee and is socially very conscious and cares about fair trade coffee. But the person who doesn't drink coffee at all, the value to them is zero, is zilch, nada, right? They don't care about coffee. So you could be doing whatever. Wherever your coffee could be coming from. It could be the most sustainable coffee. It could be organic coffee. It could be the most sort of environmentally friendly roasting and purification process, brewing process, but they don't care about it because they don't drink coffee, right? So there is heterogeneity in segments. So oftentimes people will fall into different segments when they engage with a product or a service. And that will affect their customer journey. But then very often, depending on the context, the same person could be in a different segment. So let me give you that example. So say you care a lot about your coffee, but on Monday morning when you're rushing into work, you just want to grab your cup of coffee and be in and out of the coffee shop. So you go through the drive-through. But on Saturday afternoon, when you have time and you're relaxed and you actually want to lounge around, sit around, hang out with your friends, you might meet at that same coffee shop. And now you actually care about the barista who chit-chats with you, who converses with you. You care about the ambiance in the coffee shop. You care about the sofas. You care about the music that's playing, whether they have Wi-Fi, how clean the bathrooms are, who is the other clientele, right? So depending on the context, it's the same you. You still care a lot about your coffee, but Monday morning, different context, different mindset. You want the drive-through kind of coffee. You want that same good coffee, but you want it on a drive-through because you want to be in and out. Saturday afternoon, same you, same coffee shop, same cup of coffee, but you're more relaxed. You care about other stuff as well. So your customer journey changes a lot. So this becomes really complicated. So let me finish up this example before I continue with this thought. And so the hedonic products, right? So these are products we're typically really highly engaged with, and they might be really expensive as well. And in this case, this whole customer journey gets thrown out of the window because we saw that dress or that suit or that pair of shoes in the store window, and we told ourselves we will buy this. I will buy this on my birthday, or my spouse's birthday, or my mom and dad's birthday, or my kid's birthday, or on Valentine's Day, or whatever. and then I'm just going to justify a way of buying it that day. So it's not a customer journey really. It's just I have to do this. Once I've decided I'm going to do this, I'm just going to rationalize it, right? And so if you're selling these kinds of products or engaging with these kinds of customers, then the customer journey is very different. Then you have to do something very different, right? And so this is really important to realize. So in a sense, when I began, it was challenging to think about the fact that the value in the value proposition comes from the customers. But now it becomes even more complicated because the value comes from which customer. You have to really be thinking carefully, who is my target segment? Which is the customer I care about? Which is the customer I want to engage with? And then what is their customer journey? Because then that's going to drive all the marketing activities I do, right? And then I have to find a way of convincing them and getting them to buy into my value proposition. But I can only get them to buy in to my value proposition and convince them if I understand exactly what they're looking for. And then I tailor everything that I do, all my marketing activities in a way that it is able to persuade them, right? So this is again where outbound and inbound the difference becomes irrelevant. If you do good marketing, you're actually doing both. It's yin and yang. You have to do both. You can't just solely rely on one or the other. So this is an artificial distinction, outbound and inbound. It's good marketing or bad marketing. That's what we try and do. And that all comes from being customer-centric and really understanding what is it that the customer wants and what is it and how is it that we can deliver it to them. And as Steve Jobs says, he had scar tissue to prove it that he got this wrong. And it took him years and years to understand this. Eventually that's where Apple went, right? Because it took him a while to understand this. That it's not you don't start with the engineers and the technology and then say, okay, how can we sell this? You actually begin with the customer and then say, how can we meet their needs or reduce their pain based on the capabilities of the technology we have? And of course, in the process, sometimes you have to develop the technology, right? And sometimes it is that customers will not even know what they want, right? So if you really think about radical technology, really radical innovation, customers may not even know, they cannot even articulate it, right? In that case, you have to figure out that even their basic needs, their more latent needs, their hidden needs, because they can't even tell you what it is they want, right? So if you, about 100 years ago, if you asked people, do you want a credit card? No one could tell you they wanted credit cards because they didn't even know, they couldn't even conceptualize that. But today, everyone uses credit, or almost, I shouldn't say everyone, because not everyone is in the cashless economy, but a lot of people use credit cards, right? Same way with self-driving vehicles, right? So 20 years ago, if you asked people about self-driving vehicles, no one could have said that because they couldn't even visualize that technology. But today, these are almost reality, right? In fact, the only reason these are not reality is because of regulation, because there are departments of motor vehicles and governments that are a little apprehensive about how to regulate this technology and let it on the road. So they're sort of trying to do this in a gradual fashion. But in the next 10 years, we will. This is the way technology is going, right? We won't be driving cars unless people really want to drive cars, unless they really care about driving cars. A lot of people will just have the option of just being in cars that are self-driven, right? And so this is sort of, again, comes to this question that I had do different stages of the marketing funnel for a brand campaign differ from person to person? And if so, how do we address that? So yes, they do, and they can. And in fact, they can differ for the same person. And the way we address that is really by understanding the customer journey, which happens by doing market research. Okay. So as I'm sort of beginning to conclude, I know we've run a little over time, but we had a couple of glitches. As I'm beginning to conclude, let me just say a few more things. So just bear with me. I'm going to just take a few more minutes and then we begin to wrap up. Is that what has really happened is that the nature of the customer journey, the basic nature remains the same, but fundamentally remains the same. But how it works, how it operates, that has changed because of the digital revolution. So I had this question about how is AI and big data impacting digital marketing today, and how much will it impact in the future? So the short answer to this question is huge. It's a huge impact, right? These are transforming marketing. The longer answer, unfortunately for today, you will have to wait. So my colleague Sasha Liu is going to talk more elaborately about this. So when she does her 2 sessions, she's actually going to talk about AI and big data to some extent in her sessions, right? But you can imagine how this is impacting, because now with AI and big data, we actually collect a lot of data on how people transact and how they engage with firms. So one, we are actually collecting data. So it used to be that we didn't even collect this data, right? It was so hard to, so before we had scanner data, before we could scan, people had these loyalty cards which they scanned every time. We didn't even have data like this. The only way you had data was the mom and pop store, right? Where Mr. Smith and Mrs. Smith ran the store and they knew all their customers by name and face because all the customers were really their neighbors, right? So that was the data, right? So Mr. and Mrs. Smith knew exactly what Mrs. Brown wanted, what Mr. White wanted, when they wanted it, and if they didn't have it in store, then their customers would make a request. These guys would, Mr. and Mrs. Smith would request it, then order the stuff from their suppliers, and so so that's how customer relationship management was done. It was all sort of face to face and word of mouth. These were small stores, right? So it was all there was really no data, right? No data was being collected. The data was just mentally processed, right? And there was no need for AI because you could just talk to the person, and that's how you did it. And it all worked because it was done at a very small scale, right? Then we had these scanner cards, right? So big stores, supermarkets, big box stores. People, you give people a scanner card, make them a member of the store, and then every time they buy, you scan their card so you can track their purchases. But again, you're really not talking to these people and you're collecting piecemeal data, right? So if they bring in their card, you scan it. If they don't bring in that card that day when they're buying, you can't scan it. And you can't link it across different things, right? So you may know what they're buying in your store, but you don't know what they buy at the other store, at your competitor's store. And you certainly don't know what their credit history is or what their financial situation is because you can't link this data to the bank, their banking history. What has happened now is we've got big data. We collect data every time one does anything, right? So it's not just even when you buy. So it's scanner data, you only got this information when people actually bought. But now online, you don't just collect data when they buy, you also know their browsing history. So you know on what they clicked and what they didn't click, how long they waited before they clicked on something, how long they browsed before they actually bought something. So you collect all this data, right? So you know what, not just information about your product, you know information about their consideration set and their interaction with your competitors. You can also link this with financial aspects of that person, right? You can link it to banking data and things like that. You can link it to other kinds of purchases and how they sort of operate, say, for example, in social media or in other completely different product categories. So instead of buying books, you can link it with their purchasing behavior for food, for example, right? And so you have much, much more data, right? And then if you have so much data, you can actually do micro-targeting. You can actually figure out each person's, you can begin to impute what you think their level of engagement might be with your product and in what context, right? Because you've seen them so much. And that's where AI comes in. So this is how, big data and AI are impacting everything we're talking about. And it's the same thing about the customer journey, right? So the customer journey used to be, sources of information. How would people get this? It was word of mouth. It was looking at yellow pages, consumer reports, looking at things on TV. Now, a lot of the information customers get comes from online sources, right? And so it's the same customer journey, but it's being transformed in how it actually plays out, how it operates, right? So need recognition, a lot of stuff is happening online. Information search, a lot of stuff is happening online. Consideration sets and evaluation of alternatives, this is happening online. Purchase is happening online. And then post-purchase, people are posting reviews online, right? And so it's the same customer journey, it's just changed. What has changed is how it actually works. So think about buying food in Cambridge, right? So if you need recognition is exactly the same. You feel hungry, so you want some food, you do some information search on Yelp, you compare alternatives, you actually place an order online, you purchase it, and then you consume it, and then you post a review, right? If you like the food or you don't like the food. So food, why do I use the example of food? Because it's the most physical of products, right? No amounts of bits or bytes is going to feed your hunger or thirst. It's the most physical of products. But even if you're in that business of selling the most physical of products, food, you have to be aware of what is happening online or digitally, right? how digital technology is transforming your business. Because the entire customer journey, even for this most physical of products, has gone completely digital for a lot of customers. And that is not going to change. It's going to, in fact, become bigger and bigger, right? More and more people are going to buy food online, right? So whether it's buying actual food and consuming it or buying grocery, a lot of grocery is bought online now. People order it online, it's delivered home, right? Travel is another one of these things, right? We are not in that Star Trek kind of world where Scotty can beam us up, We actually have to get onto a plane, get 30,000 feet in the air, and then land safely to get from place A to place B. It's the most physical of services, right? Flying on an airplane. But the whole process is completely digital, right? So we buy tickets online, and then post-purchase, after we've got the bags and then we are frequent flyers, we get points, all that stuff is happening online, right? So the only physical aspect is actually going to the airport, getting on that plane, and getting off it and collecting your bags. But the whole customer journey, most of the customer journey is online. So if your bags get lost or you're unhappy with the service experience or whatever it is, you complain online, right? And of course, you bought the tickets online. It was an e-ticket. So even for the most physical of products, the customer journey has been affected and transformed by the digital process, which is then obviously creating opportunities for marketers and for businesses to collect all this data, because customers are doing so much of this stuff online. And so none of this stuff could be tracked when people did this physically. It was much harder to track this. It's much easier to track this. And then tie up these data sets so you get big data. So you can relate the data set, the restaurant can relate a customer's history with their purchasing history in another category, with their banking history, with their social media history. And so you soon begin to get big data. And then how do you use that big data to figure out what kind of a customer segment this customer is actually in or likely to be in when they are going to engage with the company? That's where you use AI, right? You do some data mining. But my colleague Sasha is going to talk, Sasha Liu is going to talk more about this. Okay, and so this is how the customer journey has changed, right? So that's another way it's changed, is that we used to have the customer journey, but now we've got this inner component, right? Where, this whole notion of earned media versus paid media has become really important. So it used to be in the olden days, it was more about paid media, right? And this is where sort of I can sympathize, I can understand where this notion of outbound marketing comes in. That, it used to be primarily the way you reached customers was through paid media, right? So through advertising, billboards, TV, radio, magazines. Now, customers, there's much more engagement, interaction between customers. So paid media, one, is disproportionately less. It's still huge, by the way. It's still huge, right? But it's proportionately less because people can write their own reviews, right? They can post their own comments. So that proportion is reducing. The other important factor is credibility. Consumers just attach more credibility to what another consumer says as opposed to what an advertising firm says, or what certainly compared to what the manufacturer or the service provider or the product seller says, right? And that's again human nature, right? So those are the two things in which the way the customer journey has changed. That people are paying a lot more attention to what other customers say, people who've used the product. And so one, that proportion, just that level, that proportion has gone up because it's easier to exchange and see that information. Two, there's just more credibility attached to that, right? And so that's why Amazon has reviews, right? You could imagine in one scenario, they could have said that we don't want to have reviews because people will post negative reviews and that will reduce our sales. But they said, no, we should have reviews because it attaches more credibility. And that attracts people to our website, and then they might buy, right? So there's a trade-off, and they're willing to be on one side of that trade-off, right? So Amazon is also now a search engine, right? They're not just a place where you buy stuff. You actually go and search. So if I want to buy a vacuum cleaner, where would you go? You can go to Google and search on Google, but a lot of people will just go to Amazon and search on Amazon and see what are the kinds of vacuum cleaners people are buying, and then what are they saying about them. And so that's the way it's changed. So quickly, a couple of implications of this marketing journey, and I'm beginning to wrap up. I know we've taken a lot of time. So, if you're in the business of selling these low involvement, inexpensive, mundane products, a critical implication of understanding the customer journey is that the biggest threat to you is interruptions in the purchase process. It's stockouts. So if I'm that consumer who cares about coffee, but not so much, I have a low engagement with coffee, but I still buy coffee. The biggest threat is that when I go to buy coffee, the store doesn't have coffee, because then I'm forced to try another coffee shop, or I'm forced to try another product, maybe like tea, right? And then I could become loyal to tea or become loyal to another coffee shop. So for these kinds of products, the biggest threat is interruptions in the purchase process, because people are locked into these. That's why the customer journey is automated, right? They're skipping all those steps because they're locked in. They're kind of loyal. They say, when I have this need, I'll just go and buy that product. That's the automated process. I'll just skip through all those steps of search and comparison of alternatives and all that stuff. And then you only break that when there's an interruption in that purchase process, like a stockout. If you're selling these high involvement utilitarian products, like really sophisticated vacuum cleaners or like cars, then a big threat to you is a better performing alternative becomes available. So if you're Hoover and you don't upgrade your product for a while, you don't improve its performance, you don't enhance it, and a Dyson comes along, even though Dyson is much, much more expensive, there's going to be a certain proportion of consumers who previously bought Hoovers, but are going to find value in the Dyson, and they're going to switch, right? So you're going to lose a large share of your customers, potentially a large share of your customers, right? Depending on the kind of alternative that becomes available. So that's why if you're Hoover, even though you're a utilitarian product, you should be investing in R&D and worrying about improving your product all the time, right? So that's why a lot of these firms every year or every so often will introduce an upgraded version of that product, right? And it becomes complicated. So even a firm like Gillette, which is in the business of manufacturing razor blades and razors, every so often they will introduce a superior performing razor and a razor blade, right? And you would typically think of, why do they have to do this? Because Gillette, it's an inexpensive product. It's a mundane product. It's a utilitarian product. But there's an aspect of it. So this is why it becomes complicated. There's an aspect of it where, even if people are not highly involved, they are worried about someone else coming in and eating their lunch. So these boundaries begin to blur, just like the real world is not black and white, it's gray. So these boundaries at some stage begin to blur and becomes really complicated. So you really have to be thinking about what is the customer journey. And then with these high involvement hedonic products, these are really about a clear, relevant articulation of the brand image. And so what is the biggest threats to these kind of products is when there's a change in self-image or the product image becomes irrelevant. So if, for example, if you were a fashion product that was in the business of selling fur, and consumer perceptions change and people begin to feel that animal cruelty is bad and we should not be buying and selling fur, killing animals to get fur, then you are going to become obsolete really quickly, because people are buying this product for a hedonic purpose, to express themselves or for some emotional purpose. And what you do now contradicts that entire motivation for buying that product in some important way. And so again, you have to be thinking about the customer journey and thinking about how you relate to the customer. Then lastly, let me just conclude with this. Lastly, I want to say, why are we looking at the customer journey in so much detail? We're doing this because at every step of the journey, if we really think about every step of the journey for consumers who are engaging with our product, or our service category, if we can understand their customer journey, we can begin to identify their need gaps or pain points. So even though there might be competitors who are operating in the same ambit, if we really think carefully about the customer journey, I can almost guarantee you this, there isn't a customer journey that doesn't have need gaps or pain points, whatever the industry you might be in. And the important innovations, the innovations that are successful, address these need gaps and pain points. So let me give you some examples. Need recognition, Oral-B. So, very mature category, toothbrushes. Oral-B recognizes that most people overuse their toothbrushes because they just don't know when they should replace that toothbrush. Even though the dentist says, replace it every so many months, most people just don't have a hard time. They just don't replace the toothbrushes. So Oral-B comes up with this toothbrush which has these blue soft bristles. And the idea is that when these blue soft bristles fray, that's the time to replace the toothbrush. So essentially they activate need recognition, which then leads to greater sales. Amazon, right? So Amazon is not just a place where you buy stuff, it's become a place where you search for stuff, right? And that's one of the reasons why they had these reviews. And it's a great search engine as well. So just like Google works really hard on their search engine, so does Amazon. Or the ordering process. So Michael Dell, this was Michael Dell's insight. He was an undergraduate student at the University of Texas at Austin, and he discovers, there are all these middlemen in the buying and selling of computers, PCs. He says, let's cut the middleman out. And essentially, he contracts with manufacturers and directly sells to the consumer online, right? And in fact, what he says is you can just go online. You can customize the PC to whatever kind of PC you want. You can tailor it to fit your need. And I will have it directly shipped to your doorstep. And there are lots of advantages for Michael Dell to do this. He cuts out the middleman. He doesn't have to pay a commission. It's just in time, so he doesn't even have to have stuff manufactured and then sit on a shelf where he's paying inventory costs. So it's all just in time. So after the customer places the order, is when he has the product manufactured and then shipped directly to the customer's house. So there is no storehouse or warehouse in the middle. Again, saving on costs. And the customers get exactly what they want. Of course, he's making the trade-off that so this is happening 20 years ago. So he's making this trade-off that who are the people who can do this, who can go on a website and figure out exactly what kind of computer they want. Well, these will be people who are highly engaged with that category, who are knowledgeable about computers. It's not your average, mom and pop who is buying a computer for their high school student who will be able to do this because they really don't know the difference between bits and bytes and megahertz, right? So they can't do this. But for that target segment, it's a really great value proposition. And then, of course, then he can expand. Once he's successful with them, he gets traction with them, then he can expand and he can even sell computers in a store, in a big box store. But that comes later. But the value proposition really starts with this. Amazon, payment, right? So payment, and Amazon identifies a need gap, and they make the one-click system. They, in fact, for a while, they had patented this in the US. So in the US, you couldn't buy on a website with one click on any competitor website. The competitor website had to give you at least 2 clicks, force you through 2 clicks before you could buy, because Amazon for a while had patented this. Consumption, right? So Pepsi was always behind Coke in the US. The way they beat them was they introduced the 2-liter bottle. And then the second way Coke then hit back was they introduced these cans. For these cans, they introduced these boxes which you could just slide straight into the refrigerator. So used to be, you'd buy the cans in those 6-packs or those 12-packs. Or you keep them in a closet or a cupboard somewhere in your pantry, and then when you wanted to drink it, you had to take it out, take the can out, put it in your fridge, let it cool, and then you drank it. But with these boxes, these easy slide boxes, you could just slide these boxes into a refrigerator. Now your refrigerator had to be pretty big, and that's what most US refrigerators are like. I've discovered this since moving to the UK that the refrigerators here are smaller. But you can just slide the whole, you buy it at the supermarket, just slide it into your refrigerator, and then when you need the can, it's cool, you just take it out, right? So the packaging just changes consumption. And of course, with that kind of packaging and those cans sitting in the refrigerator, which are cooler and more pleasant to drink when you want to drink them, they also found that their sales went up. Just like Pepsi found that when they introduced the 2-liter bottle, their sales of Pepsi went up. And then post-disposal, right? So lots of firms do this. Evian is one example, that you produce bottles that are biodegradable or environmentally sustainable, right? And so people who care not just about consumption, but about the post-consumption aspect, about disposal, they will buy into the value proposition more. So again, different products, different product categories, but you can see that if you think carefully about the customer journey, you can identify need gaps and pain points and use those then to create new value propositions, to innovate, right? Okay, so we've taken a lot of time. It's coming on to 90 minutes almost. So let me begin to wrap up, and let me say what we've talked about today is really about customer centricity. And there are three important aspects of customer centricity. One is to think about the value proposition. The second is to think about customer focus. The third is to think about the customer journey. And if we think about these three things, there are lots of implications for firm strategy and execution. I'll list out a couple. So one is it helps us ensure brand loyalty or to create interest for different kinds of products. So for example, low involvement, utilitarian or hedonic products, and you have to figure out which category you fall into with the customer or what kind of customers you're engaging with. It can help us identify opportunities for value creation. It can help us figure out what are the problems in our value proposition. So what are the pain points for our customers or the sources of weakness? One thing I should say, we haven't had time to talk about this, but let me leave you with this thought, is that this framework applies in many contexts. So it certainly applies in the for-profit context, like we've seen, but these ideas are important even in the not-for-profit context. They are important in the B2C, the business to customer domain. They are important in the B2B, the business to business domain. They're important in emerging markets as much as they are important in mature or developed markets. The final thing I would say is practice is the key to understanding and succeeding with these frameworks. Just like you can't really learn to play golf by reading the USGA, the US Golf Association rules. You can certainly read the USGA rules, but that won't teach you how to play golf. The only way you learn how to play golf is actually being on the golf course and trying to hit the ball. It's the same thing. These are frameworks, but you really have to sort of work with these, practice these, and there'll be a process of trial and error as you figure out things. So every context is different. These basic frameworks remain the same, but you can apply them in different contexts. And it's trial and error. Really, it's trial and error that you use these and you figure out what works and what doesn't work. Now, certainly there are some best practices where these rules come from, but you have to apply these to figure out how these work. So with that, I'm done with my presentation. And let me hand the screen back to Hitanshu, and then we can take it from there. So just give me a second. Hitanshu, did you have I handed the screen back? Okay. So if there is a question or two, I can take one right now. Otherwise, if you think we have run out of time and we are done, then we can stop here. So Hitanshu, let me know. I can hand
I haven't received any question. Hello.
Yes, I can hear you. The connection is a little slow, but I can hear you.
I think, Professor, we had done. It was a great, wonderful session. I think we can wrap up. And if you have any parting lines to say, otherwise we are good to wrap up.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for being so patient. We had a couple of glitches, but we kind of worked through them. Hope you enjoyed the session, and I'll see you next week. I have another session scheduled for next Saturday, same time. So I'll see you then. And so enjoy the rest of your week, and I look forward to seeing you next Saturday. So thank you. Enjoy your weekend and the rest of the week. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, Professor. Thanks a lot, guys, for joining in. See you next time in the next session. Bye-bye. Have a good weekend.